Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting, the December meeting of Children and Young People. Croeso pawb, croeso i'r cyfarfod plant a pobl ifanc ar gyfer rhagfyr ar gyfer Sir Fynwy. Good morning. My name is Tudor Thomas and I am Chair of Children and Young People, and I will be chairing the meeting today. I obviously welcome all the attendees and anybody who might be watching the live stream at home. I'll go promptly to the agenda, and I will go firstly to apologies, and I have received one apology, and that is from Peter Strong, who represents the NUE, the teacher union. He's unable to attend today. I've received no other apologies. Item 2, declarations of interest. We'll take that as and when as the agenda items come up on the meeting today. Item 3, public open forum. I'm not aware of anyone wishing to address the meeting this morning, and so there's no one to address us. So we go now to agenda item 4, and this is a verbal update on the progress regarding Chepstow Comprehensive School. We've had a brief report in advance from the Chief Officer, and I believe the Chief Officer now, Will McLean, is going to come in to take us through this fairly brief report, the update on the building status. Thank you, Mr. McLean.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you. As you said, my name is Will McLean. I'm the Chief Officer for Children and Young People in Monmouthshire, and I'm pleased to be here this morning to present or to share with the Select Committee an update on Chepstow School and where it is and how our plans are developing around that. So the briefing paper is just that, really, just to provide you with a sense of where the school is in terms of its age and so on. You can see there that it's dating from the mid-60s for the main building, but actually there's been quite significant development on the site in the 80s and the 90s, and that it's adjacent to the leisure centre in Chepstow as well. You'll see that in terms of the measurement, in terms of the categorisation, it's category C, which is the definition of that is that it's poor with some major defects. However, the suitability assessment is a B, so there's a balance between those two judgments. And you can see that at the time of that assessment, there was £2.1 million worth of backlog maintenance identified. However, since that time, the authority has invested in excess of £1.5 million capital into Chepstow School, undertaking a lot of work. And I don't know if colleagues and members have been to the school recently, you'll see that it's really significantly enhanced. The front of the school looks much better in terms of the cladding work, significant replacement window programme undertaken. The school reception has been turned from one side around the building to another to better, safer reception area. We put LED lighting throughout the school. We've resurfaced. So it does look like a significant improvement on where it had been in the recent past. You'll note that clearly there's a conversation about Chepstow School and Band C, and Band C is expected to commence in 2024-25. I think my note of probably not caution, but just advice to the committee is the point which is in, it begins the paragraph, in recent months, the focus of the 21st Century Schools programme has shifted. And we've seen that across lots of activity in Welsh Government, and for instance, the normal capital grant which they provide to the local authorities for schools, the next iteration of that grant will have to be spent on improving the sustainability and working towards net zero. So it will go from being grant that we were able to use for backlog maintenance and so on to grant with a very specific issue. I know that Welsh Government are still working through what they want Band C of their programme to look like. And I guess that shift in focus and emphasis at Welsh Government level, the age of some aspects of the building in Chepstow will mean that we will have to work through a number of options to determine how we rejuvenate that site, because it might be that actually retrofitting the school for zero carbon compliance might be significantly more expensive than new build aspects. So we'll have to do that in the coming period of time to understand what the scope really is with the current building, the site, which is a very generous site. And you'll see in the penultimate paragraph there that actually the way that the school is attended at the moment, there is quite a lot of capacity within the school site as well in terms of the building itself, with over 500 surplus places at the moment. We're seeing a really significant effort by the head teacher and by all of the school to improve that and reduce those surplus places, which is really great to see. And you see them getting some good traction, I think, with their cluster primary schools, really encouraging, demonstrating the links in terms of the curriculum and so on that will really kind of encourage children to attend Chepstow School in the future. So obviously, at the moment, in terms of 21st century schools, we're working on both the Abergavenny project. Eyes are clearly on the Chepstow project and making sure that we are able to transition smoothly from one project into the other. But there are some unknowns at the moment, which we'll have to work through to make sure that we're well placed to do that. Thank you, Chair. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Will, for that really good update on where we're at the moment. Hand over now to members of the committee, and I know obviously two members are from the councillors for the Chepstow area and obviously know the area really well and know the issues and so on. So, Councillor Louise Brown, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I've been trying to raise a hand, but I couldn't. Oh, sorry, okay. There is one in the chat now. No yeah, just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. I just wondered, in view of what the Chief Officer has said, what do we actually know when? Because obviously it was a percentage of build costs that in relation to Band B, and in Band C you said that's not certain. Do we know when they'll actually know? And I think the point that you were making was that if it would cost more to make it net zero with the current building, then obviously they would potentially look at a new build, because sometimes if you've got an old building, it costs actually more to make it energy efficient than it does if it's not. So if you give us an idea, because obviously this is 2024 to 25 as to when they're going to make the decision with regard to the capital costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brown. Yeah, that's exactly right. And when we've, I think our recent experience of demolishing both Caldecott and Monmouth School was that schools which are a similar age without the developments in the 80s and the 90s, we found that the construction methods, the use of certain materials was highly problematic in terms of that. So, the asbestos piece, particularly in Caldecott, was a significant challenge. So I think until you undertake that very, very detailed survey, understand the construction and so on, it's very difficult to say whether the building could tolerate that level of renewal or whether a re-provision would be the better option. With regarding the funding intervention rate, so in Band A it was 50-50 funding intervention rate. For Band B it shifted to 65-35. There are some other categories, special schools, Welsh schools, where there are higher degrees of funding intervention. I understand that Welsh Government are working through those considerations internally at the moment, and I'm not cited as to what the funding intervention rate will be next time at the moment. So that's something which we'll have to wait and try and influence. I think actually we've got a 21st century update at the Association of Directors of Education Wales on Friday this week, so tomorrow morning. So I'm hoping that we'll begin to see some clarity emerge around that. But as I've said, there has been this very, very clear step towards net zero carbon as a key driver for capital investment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Chair. In view of clarity that might come as we're going along, could we ask for a further update? You know, because it sounds as if this is quite a fluid situation. I've got some other questions, but I'll wait for Councillor Edwards because I think he put his hand up. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Well, we'll come back to Louise. We go now then to Councillor Christopher Edwards again for Chepstow.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Will, for your report. As I've previously mentioned in a different meeting, I'm fortunate enough to have visited Chepstow School since becoming a councillor for St King's Mark, and was given a guided tour, which I benefited from speaking to staff there and seeing the school environment for myself. So I can appreciate that the initial focus at the moment is on the development of Abergavenny School in relation to the actual 21st century schools programme, but extremely grateful that important preparation work is being undertaken in regards to Chepstow School, especially to ensure that we are ready to bid for that Bansi investment when the window of opportunity opens. However, as you've outlined, 21st century schools is a long way off for Chepstow in 2024-2025. So although I'm pleased that over £1 million has been spent enhancing current facilities at the school, as you've outlined the recladding, the remodelling works, improvements to lighting, as well as spending, I think it's about 200,000 on IT facilities and the infrastructure as well. And of course, delighted to see that further improvement made during the summer holidays of this year. I think you only have to look at the building as you suggested, and it looks like a new build in some areas. I think 2 years ago, the communal area and corridor lighting was replaced to LED lights. This, of course, reduces the carbon footprint. At the moment, I think there's an upgrade of the lighting in classrooms as well, which has greatly improved the learning environment for students. Now, I've seen the difference myself by moving from one old style classroom to another, which has been transformed by upgrading of windows, improved lighting, room layout, a more effective classroom colour scheme, and at the risk of sounding like DIY SOS, also accent walls as well. So you can fully appreciate the huge improvement some classrooms have gone through to the benefit of students and staff alike. Now, I'm a parent to young children. I've been a Monmouthshire school governor for nearly 10 years now, and have been around teaching professionals for longer than I care to remember. And I think I'd like to think that everyone involved in this would like to see more of the same in Chepstow. A sort of continued investment into the classroom learning environment and exterior of the building. And ideally, I suppose, want for a better word, the creation of more model classrooms. Now, I appreciate that budgets are stretched, but in order to keep up with the times and their contemporaries, Chepstow's students and its only secondary school, I think, need this investment now in order to quickly progress, if you like. Now, I notice this has been touched upon in your report today from the points I raised at our last meeting. So my question to officers is one of what more can be done now for Chepstow School in the interim, so that Chepstow students are getting the full benefit of decent learning environment in a Monmouthshire school like their contemporaries are in other Monmouthshire towns. So can we progress this continued interim investment sooner? That's my main question. I also like to raise this bit about the surplus places as well, and the what seems like the loss of pupils to Wydene. I think I mentioned at the last, I think it was the last Strong Communities committee meeting, the possibility of perhaps having a survey of leaving pupils who are leaving their schools, or survey of their parents as to why they're choosing Wydene rather than Chepstow School. I think it'd be very beneficial. I mean, I hope this doesn't sound like anti-Welsh language, because I'm, as you can tell from my accent, I'm Welsh myself. But I wonder whether there's some kind of misunderstanding about the Welsh education system. I know we've got that on the agenda next, and it would be good to come to some kind of conclusion of that as to why Wydene is being chosen in some parents' perspectives rather than Chepstow School, especially as Chepstow School is an absolutely wonderful learning environment. I think there's quite a few of us who've been there, and I know the current head teacher and staff of that school have really transformed the school around. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Councillor Edwards. Do you want me to come back, Chair, on those two?
Yes, you would, please.
Thank you. So with regard to your first point around the continued investment, obviously we're always reviewing the capital finance that we have available to us. There are, of course, pressures elsewhere in Monmouthshire schools in terms of making sure that they are kept up to the suitable standard that they should be. So it's always a balance in terms of how we do that, and there will be some primary schools, for instance, that need some investment, but we'll continue to work both with the schools and with my colleagues in finance to understand if there is scope to further advance the work that's been undertaken in Chepstow already. I think we can commit to that, certainly. With regards to the surplus places, I agree that a survey to understand that would be a good step for us. I think it's quite a complicated situation, and I think there's no easy pattern to identify as to certain schools which do go to Wydene rather than Chepstow and so on. It's quite a mixed result over the catchment. One of the challenges for Chepstow is that it is our smallest cluster of schools, so the number of children actually within the cluster is the lowest. So I think it's at about 180 probably in a year 6 cohort. So when you compare that to the next nearest one is probably Abergavenny is probably 250. So there's already quite a big difference built in then in terms of the size of the cluster of schools. I think one point which is interesting, and I know Sharon's going to talk about some feedback around the WESP. One of the interesting things is that I think some of the messages that we hear, sometimes potentially anecdotally, and it'd be good if we can transfer that anecdote into a survey that we can then capture and understand and use in a more qualitative and quantitative sense, is that the opposite seems to happen only 20 miles up the road in Monmouth. So whereas we see probably a net loss of pupils into Wydene in Chepstow, we see a gain of pupils from England into Monmouth. So I think we just need to understand why that is and to get to the heart of that. But asking the parents is a really good option to do that. So yes, we are going to look at that, and I'm meeting with colleagues from the Access team this afternoon actually to talk about how we address some of those factors.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Edwards?
Thanks, Will. I think with Monmouth, I suppose although you have got options there, is that I think the nearest state school in England is quite a distance away, isn't it, compared to the comparison of Chepstow and Wydene. Yeah,
I'm not sure it's John Curl, I think, is the comparator in England. I don't know what that distance is, but yeah, that might well be the fact. I know the proximity is a challenge in Chepstow.
Thanks, Will.
Okay, thanks both. Councillor Louise Brown, do you want to come back with some further comments and questions?
Yeah, I think I'd generally support the comments that Councillor Edwards has made with regard to the need for investment in the interim, because of the fact that I think in the report it says that there was a 2.3 million backlog and 1.5 million has been spent. So there's obviously about £1 million roughly gap in what still needs to be done to make it a good teaching environment in the meantime in terms of classroom and facilities. The survey, I think, would be a very, very good idea, and I was pleased to see that the Chief Officer would support that. In the report itself, it mentioned about also looking at the primary estate, and the Dell School is very close to there, and it has a number of, well, I know it's got at least one porter cabin, and then it's also got possibly some structures in the temporary type of structures in the sort of garden, the back grass area as well. And I mean, that porter cabin has been there for almost must be 30 years plus, and you know, you would have thought by now that it would have been replaced by a permanent type of building in view of the length of time. I know it was there when my son was there, and he's nearly 30 now, you know, so I know it's been there quite a long time, and it was there originally as a temporary structure. So I think that you know, in terms of looking at the Dell School, not only the secondary but primary, I think that if there is any capital funding, I think the school would benefit. I know it's not anything that the school has actually mentioned, but I think it would be helpful in view of the length of time that they've had a porter cabin, and there has been investment in a number of other primary schools. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Brown. We, you know, clearly in terms of, you know, the Dell is our biggest school in the Chepstow cluster, so it's a 2-form entry school, and you know, we'll look to understand the flows of pupils in the future. So that's driven in essence by 2 factors. One is live birth rate data, and one is by housing development. In truth, the cost of replacing porter cabins with substantive buildings is probably too great for the kind of the grant funding that we use at the moment in terms of backlog maintenance and bringing schools up to scratch. So it might well be that something like Section 106 monies could be used to do something like that in the future. But again, that's something. The strategic view of the cluster itself, understanding where those needs are likely to be in the future, is the way to do that, and then working through the budget streams that we can identify to allow us to meet those needs.
Okay, thank you, Will.
Could
Louise, do you want to come back?
Question, yeah. It's just on another topic area. Within the report, it says that the pupil levels are expected to remain very much the same, but I wondered about looking at what the Forest of Dean was doing in terms of their development, because obviously there are some proposed developments around the High Beach roundabout area, but obviously we don't know whether or not they'll come forward. Any of those will come forward in the local development plan, but there is the site at Sudbury, Beachley Barracks, which there are potentially 800 houses there, but they have talked about the need for additional infrastructure, presumably the Chepstow bypass. So I'm just wondering whether or not full account is taken of the development plans within the Forest of Dean in terms of demand for school places, because obviously the catchment area at the moment presumably allows people in Chepstow to have the choice, and obviously it does in Monmouth, between border schools. So I wondered whether or not that was looked at in terms of the because I know, for example, in Lydney, although Lydney's not obviously Chepstow, but they are building around Chepstow on the Gloucestershire side, but also Lydney had 1,700 new houses as well. So I just wondered whether you'd taken account of those developments as well, because obviously Chepstow is Chepstow Gloucestershire as well as Chepstow Monmouthshire, and it's an unusual position in the fact that the town itself is split in two, you know, literally on the border. But I just thought that would be an issue to raise, to see what your response on that would be as well. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Councillor Brown, and unfortunately we can't take account of development in other places, and so that which takes place in I guess the same, so we can't take account of that development in England in the same way. Members will be aware of, or they might be aware of, the school, Goitra School is right on the border with Torvine, and there's significant housing planned on the Torvine side of that border, but we can't take account of that. Yet there might be an additional pressure on that school in terms of pupils wanting to go there. So whilst we can't plan or ask for Section 106 monies for the developments in England, clearly, because that would be for that local authority to do. What it might do is to take up a greater number of the places in the current English settings, thereby not making those available for children potentially from Wales who might be further away from that school than their compatriots in England. So that could be the knock-on consequence. But we're unable to take account of it in our plans in terms of that housing development, but it's something for us to be conscious and aware of.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Will. Are there any other members of the committee who would wish to speak on the Chepstow School update? No? Well, thank you, Mr. McLean, for coming in today and giving us that update. It's been very useful, and obviously the brief written report, and in terms of the move towards when the school is redeveloped, the Welsh Government initiative is going to focus very much on net zero output in schools. And obviously that will happen now in King Henry. Interesting as well that obviously it might cost more to retrofit as opposed to putting a new building, and issues around asbestos and all the other issues that come about with rebuild. It's heartening to hear that 1.5 million has already been spent. And I went down there when much of that money had been spent, and spent practically a day there with the head, Matt Sims. And you know, I must applaud the efforts of the head and all the staff in terms of what they're doing in the school. And that, you know, things are really improving. And I note Councillor Edwards' points about classrooms. Obviously, the structure of the classroom has a huge effect on learning. And having been to Caldegot and Monmouth, then you can see that difference. And as somebody who taught for 20 years in England and in Wales and King Henry, if you're in a fairly poor classroom, that does set a sort of an ethos for the lesson in a sense, and it is quite difficult to sort of uplift that. And then obviously the contrast in Chepstow, where there are sort of refurbished classrooms, which obviously then make the others probably in a sense almost look worse. Yeah, and the key point I would make, and I agree with Councillor Brown and Councillor Edwards, the fact that there should be ongoing investment, because there are children going through the school now, and the thought of a development in 2024 or 25, many of those will have actually left, won't they? They'll have finished their learning at secondary phase, and really it doesn't really benefit them. And I know it's a difficult balancing act. So I think we need to revisit that. The issue of surplus places is obviously of ongoing concern. And I think that is difficult, in that Chepstow is right on the border. It is very much a border school. It's slap bang on the England-Wales border. But whether the fact that it is, as it were, a Welsh or a Wales curriculum, as a CYP, we can't change that, because Welsh Government legislation, Welsh Government has devolved power over education. Personally, I can't see them changing the curriculum for one school because it happens to be on the border. It is actually in Wales, and therefore it will have to adhere to the Wales curriculum. So I think that is, you know, that is difficult. I very much agree with the concept of a questionnaire, because I think rather than anecdotal evidence, I spoke to so and so last week and they said they didn't like. It would be much better to have some sort of quantitative and qualitative evidence there to say, well, these are some of the reasons why parents choose for their children to go across the border. And I personally, I always like to go on evidence rather than on hearsay. And I think that the concept of a questionnaire that Councillor Edwards put forward is really good. So once again, thanks for that report. I think it's been very useful, and I think it is something that on CYP we need to revisit in a reasonable amount of time, so that we can keep both the councillors and parents updated in the Chepstow area, because obviously it's a very important issue for them in that area. Yeah, so thank you, Mr. McLean, for coming in today. Diolch yn fawr.
No worries, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now then we move on now then to agenda item 5, which is the Welsh Education Strategic Plan, and we're going to receive a verbal update here on the conclusions of the consultation process ahead of reporting to Cabinet, and obviously welcome Sharon Randall-Smith, who's the Deputy Chief Officer. So I'll hand over now to Sharon Randall-Smith. Thank you. Diolch.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Sharon Randall-Smith, Head of Service for Children and Young People. I've come today, as agreed, to give you an update in our progress towards our draft Welsh and Education Strategic Plan. So since the last meeting, when we consulted with you as a select group, we have had face-to-face consultation meetings with our Welsh in Education Forum and our head teachers. We've also ensured that all of our stakeholders have had copies of the report and are currently beginning to receive some responses. The closing date to our consultation is the 6th of December, and as of yesterday, we've had 5 formal responses received. However, as with most consultations, we are expecting to see a flurry now over the next couple of days, and we know we are expecting them, for example, from EAS and from Estyn and various other parties. So it's really hard at the moment to give you an indication of the outcomes, because obviously we are expecting some more responses. Generally, I would say that there is support for Welsh language and the growth of Welsh language across Monmouthshire. I think it would be fair to say that, you know, there's some disappointment in our seedling school not being opened from 2022, but from 2023. And some concerns as well from our English medium schools about how what impact that will have on them and their schools and their places, and how we ensure that our plan is robust enough to be able to meet the Welsh language development in all our schools, English or Welsh medium. But as I said, generally, we're still waiting for responses, and many of the responses are with translation at the moment. So that's kind of the update on where we are. We have also discussed our Welsh and Education Plan with Estyn in our recent meeting, and as I said, await their response formally. Actions that we've taken as officers, we have met, particularly taking on board your concern at the last meeting about the seedling school. We have looked at other options, and in order to establish a Welsh seedling as soon as possible. Despite our best efforts, I think it will be very challenging for us to be able to achieve this by 2022, given the fact that we have a consultation process and, you know, we're about to go into an election, but we are confident that we can achieve that for September 2023. And in response as well to questions about where children who were planning to attend that school from September 2022, we will look to provide our seedling to cover reception and year 1 in 2023. So we hopefully will be able to communicate that to parents as soon as possible in order for them to be able to make plans should the draft West be approved by Cabinet and then also by Welsh Government. I'm also pleased to be able to update you that the local authority have established a 3-year pilot for late immersion provision, and that is now up and running. We have a few pupils who are attending that provision, and it is seeming to have quite an impact already in a and applications for reception. So they're looking at 20 or 21 this September, which is a huge increase on the previous year and what they were originally expecting. So we are obviously seeing some impact there. I'm also pleased to report that to support and accelerate this work, the local authority have successfully bid for and achieved a grant to support late immersion, and we've been awarded almost £84,000 to spend over the next 2 terms by the end of March now, to support and accelerate that. So that's based on additional staffing, additional resources, release time for staff in both of our Welsh medium schools, specific training in late immersion techniques, so that we can be ready to meet that demand going forward as we increase that provision and the demand. So we are currently, as I said, waiting to close the consultation. The final report with the draft West will be presented to Cabinet on the 19th of January, and subject to that and any further amendments, we're actually on schedule to submit to Welsh Government by the end of January. I'm happy to take any further questions, Chair.
Well, thank you, Sharon, for that really good report and updating us now to where we're at with WESP. Are there any questions or comments from members? I must declare here as well that I have an interest, is a non-prejudicial interest, in that I'm a governor for on the governing body of Ysgol Gymraeg y Fenni in Abergavenny. Any questions? Oh, Councillor Jones.
May I also declare the same interest as a governor at Ysgol Gymraeg y Fenni, but thank you, Sharon, for your update. I appreciate that. And it's only, I suppose, a shame that our meeting is a few days before the closure of the consultation period, which might have been a bit more useful to receive an insight into the rest of the submissions, but equally I understand why that is happening. Thank you. Appreciate your help.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Okay. Now then, I've got a hand up, Councillor Martin Grogart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Trying to get my camera working. There we are. The best laid plans can sometimes be put slightly off course by external concerns. And I'm thinking of one area where it might be possible to give a bit more support. Councillor Powell and I are both members of the governing body at King Henry, and in recent months in governor reports we've heard of youngsters who had previously attended the Welsh medium secondary provision in Pontypool being withdrawn from that and joining King Henry, and King Henry making Welsh language provision to try to encourage the retention and development of the language for this group of youngsters. Is there any funding streams or other support that might be made available to King Henry in the absence of Monmouthshire secondary provision to help them to support this Welsh language provision that they're making for this small group of children?
Thank you, Councillor Grogart. At the moment, the grant that we've applied for is a late immersion grant. So it wouldn't necessarily be for pupils who are already Welsh speaking, but it is to encourage more of our learners and their parents to engage in Welsh medium education. However, I would say that secondary schools in other authorities, Welsh medium secondary schools, have established late immersion classes, and therefore they and their counties will be able to access that grant for them. We're not in that situation, and in order to support Welsh language, I think it is recognised that we need to look creatively at any solutions, and obviously we work with Welsh Government and with our other partners in order to do so. It may well be in the future that Welsh Government will consider additional funding to support our schools, but I think there's nothing that I'm aware of that is available at this minute in time.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Grogart, do you want to come back on that? Are you happy with the response?
No, I was hoping it would have been more positive, but I can understand it's not in our hands. So thank you, Sharon.
Okay, thank you. Any other member of the committee wishing to make a comment or ask a question on the Welsh Education Strategic Plan? No. Well, I sit on the West group, so this is something that I'm fairly familiar with on a meeting last week. The only comments that I would make, more for a personal view really, but obviously disappointed that the seedling school will not probably now come until September 2023. On the other hand, I am heartened by the fact that when it does emerged, when it is established, then there will be provision for reception and year one, because it does concern me, and I know the people working hard in the Ysgol Maithrin, the Welsh Play School provision in Monmouth. They are worried about the loss of children into the Welsh medium system. Once children have started school, they very rarely move school. It's not often, because it's quite a big decision when they settle with friends and teacher and so on. So I'm heartened by that, and also hearing the good news last week at the West meeting about the pilot for late immersion, and that does appear to be working well. And again, if you look at structures of families, if you move to the area and one child can go into reception in a Welsh medium school, but you have a child in year 2 or 3 who you really would like them to have Welsh medium education and to keep your children together in school, then that immersion scheme, and obviously we've had some grant money for that, I think that is particularly heartening. And the last thing I would say, it really does show, in terms of what Councillor Groker has said, that the travelling to Ysgol Gyfun Gwynllyw, if you live even in Abergavenny, it's over a 12-mile journey at the start and the end of the day. And I know those children are secondary phased, but it's still a long day, and it adds to it. And many parents then think, shall I, with very good provision in King Henry, shall I just send them there where they can walk to school or a short bus ride? So it's something that certainly I'm working on my sort of submission. That's something that I will mention. But thank you very much, Sharon, for coming this morning and updating us now on what's happening as far as Welsh medium education is concerned. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks then. We move on now then, and we go to agenda item 6, and we're here now to going to listen to a report on the progress on the Inspire to Achieve programme in developing the skills and employment sector. Now this has been before Economy and Development Select Committee, and the people that I've got listed, and I can see Louise Wilson has come on screen, and we've got is it Hazel Jones, Mark Hennessy and Melissa Toombs, who are coming along this morning. So I obviously welcome you to the meeting. I've got to say this, I particularly welcome Melissa Toombs, because she's a former pupil of mine some time ago and is making me feel older than ever. Can I make one plea that perhaps, this has been through Economy and Development. Shall we try to keep to sort of a 10-minute input? I know that's going to be quite difficult, and then go to questions, because I think that will be more productive. But I hand over now to the team. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. We will keep it as 10 minutes to time as possible. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting us this morning to CYP Select. I'm Hannah Jones, Employment and Skills Lead at the local authority. So we're going to give a brief presentation on some key projects in the team which we think you will like to hear information on. So can I have the next slide, Louise, please? So as we said, we've done introductions, so we'll move on to, so our purpose is to support children, young people and adults to gain to engage in education, training, employment, provide opportunities for new skills, achieve the right qualifications, to develop and support apprenticeships, graduate and intern opportunities in the local authority, to support the most vulnerable, offering appropriate interventions for safe, prosperous and healthy lifestyle, and to work with our local businesses, employers and communities on a local and regional basis to ensure that, Monmouthshire thrives and succeeds. Next slide, please. So this is the structure. As you can see, I apologise if it is very small on the screen. I know it's in your pack. So here we've got our projects, the Inspire, Community Support Plus, our Infuse project, our Homelessness project, our I2A, and I'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand you over to Mark, who's going to talk about our Campus programme.
Hey, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, our campus program, which is key focused on early prevention really amongst young people aged 11 to 25, and as per our aim there, as you can see, is to identify those young people aged 11 to 25 that are most at risk of homelessness or have actually become homelessness, to support them in achieving and maintaining that stable, safe home environment, and then from that a sustainable and level of safe independence and personal well-being. There's two members of the team, myself and my colleague Amanda. So, okay, next slide, please, Louise. And where we fit in, because we've covered the 11 to 25 age spectrum, obviously we work closely with, if we look up on the left-hand side of the slide there, and again, as Hannah said, apologies if this is a little small to view, but in particular, with the 11 to 16-year-olds in schools, we utilise an early identification tool, which runs alongside our early identification of those at risk of NEET. And what this does is we use that, we run a biannual data kit, which we share with the schools, and then we work with those schools to identify and those most at need or who we feel the most at risk of becoming homeless in the future. We assess those needs, and we'll come on to in a moment about the type of support we do, and we review that, and we support and be part of things like the core assessment support plans with social services, multi-agency meetings, etc., and the early help panel within Monmouthshire to make sure there's a comprehensive range of support put in place to prevent that homelessness from occurring and to support the wider families. The key gap this fills at this age range is for us is that traditionally more identification of homelessness amongst young people usually comes when it happens, and given the core issue at the moment, there is a huge lack of accommodation opportunities for young people, with things like bed and breakfast hotels being utilised at the moment, especially during the COVID period. Then now more than ever, as recognised by the nationwide, is the fact that early identification is key to prevent us getting to that stage. And as you'll see, once we go through that process, once those young people are supported, if they're still in need and still at risk at the end of their school term, we then share that data with Monmouthshire's housing options team to help them develop a more stringent forecast, if you like, of the amount of accommodation they may need to support these young people in the future. And likewise with those aged 16 plus, similar process, but working on a much broader range of projects such as supporting people projects, job centres, etc., as well as self-referrals, and again to advocate for them, provide them with independent living skills, etc., and to make sure they are provided with appropriate accommodation really by working closely with the housing options team. Next slide please, Louise. Our approach to support is very holistic, especially in the fact that in schools, is because as you can see there, we're looking at the homeless prevention, that transition into housing. So there's a lot of advocacy involved with that and helping to develop those independent living skills for young people on the cusp of becoming homeless as well. But naturally, we use a holistic approach because things like mental health, emotional well-being, and particularly the family relationship support, any breakdowns within that family. So we work closely with people like Lamai, Mind, etc., to develop those wider support packages, if you like, because ideally we can sustain the family environment where we want it to stay. Next slide please, Louise. This is sort of a broad overview here of the figures for the past 2 years of the young people we've supported. So in total there's been 158, so 73 at key stage 3 and 4, 85 in 16 to 25-year-olds. I see various cases have come into us, as you can see there, 21 classes homeless at the point of referral, 15 already in supported housing, but we've given them additional support with budgeting, independent living skills, and then there's 122 of those that were at risk. And again, as you can see then, in terms of outcomes, 47 have successfully we've helped them access accommodation with housing. and referred to relevant support agencies such as Mind, adult mental health teams, CAMS, etc., and social services. And in terms of the feedback we obtain is that what schools are identifying is, in particular, is that we are able to unpack and identify lots of core concerns amongst those young people, started including things like safeguarding concerns, which they hadn't already disclosed or unpacked previously within school. Okay, thank you.
Over to you, Melissa.
Yeah, Shemai Bow. So I'm Melissa Toombs and I'm the Key Stage 2-3 transition worker. This is a new project based around early identification and prevention to support young people in Year 6 who are identified as at risk of becoming NEET in the future by providing one-to-one emotional and behavioural support through coordinated transition. So our young people in Year 6 are identified using an early identification tool, which effectively gives us a data set. This data is based on attendance, both authorised and unauthorised, levels for core subjects, exclusions and time excluded for, ALN status, free school meals, whether they're looked after, have English as a second language, and the number of school moves. So this gives each young person a score, and it helps us to decide how at risk they are. I then engage with the 30 primary schools within Monmouthshire, using this data as a conversation opener for professional discussions with the schools and their staff, basically is how best to support those individuals. I then meet our young people and work with them, getting to know them before they move into one of our 4 comprehensives. So currently I'm supporting 10 young people in Chepstow, 42 in Caldecott, 43 in King Henry and 36 in Monmouth. So the type of support given is individual and needs led, but mostly around well-being, because really, unless we get this right, then we really don't have a chance of helping our young people. And every behaviour has a reason and a story behind it, so it's unpicking that too. So then I've started to use sort of Thrive and ELSA type interventions. So this could range anything from dealing with emotions such as anger issues, anxiety, self-esteem, to draw and talk therapies, play-based therapies. We talk through worries and concerns, we do problem solving. I act as an advocate or an in-between person. I also then network with school clusters and sit upon the 4 MAMS committees within the comprehensives. I work with the early help panel, which I take referrals from and feed into, and also with the pupil referral service. All this ensures that the correct amount of support is in place and that we allow the young people to develop and reach their full potential, and to show them that there is a big wide world out there and they should dream big and all their possibilities are endless. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Melissa. Okay, I'm going to skip over some of our I2A and I2W slides just because I realise we're pressured on time and you've heard me talk about these before. But what I would like to talk to you about is our NEET strategy, which is currently being reviewed. So the NEET strategy is all about identifying those young people who have become NEET. And we've got some figures there that look at our year 11, 12 and 13 figures for the past couple of years. As part of the review strategy, some things that we're kind of doing to update at the moment is look at the journey those young people are having. We've got consistent numbers of NEET young people in tier 1 and 2, which are traditionally very hard to engage young people. We've got issues coming through such as long-term anxiety, mental health issues, which are impacting their journey. And whereas there are very long waiting lists on specialist services, so something that we're seeing is consistent numbers in those tiers. The NEET strategy for Wales is also being refreshed currently, the Youth Engagement Progression Framework, and so that's something that we really need to consider as we're updating our NEET reduction strategy. We've got a network called our Keeping in Touch group, which is really developing all the time and is the partners around Monmouthshire that can impact on the young people that we consider as part of our tier 1 and tier 2s. And then areas for development are to align to a new ALN protocol, to really make sure that our vulnerable groups are catered for when we look at our mapping of the young people that are becoming NEET, which would include our young carers, our LAC and our educated at home young people. And our colleges that are outside of Wales, we're seeing increasing numbers of young people that are progressing through to those colleges. And so our information sharing is critical then when we look at the numbers that are coming through for our NEETs. I'll draw your attention just quickly, but this presentation is in your slides. You can see in 2020, obviously, that numbers that went up slightly. And obviously that is a big impact, specifically year 13s who perhaps would have gone to university but chose to take a year out instead. So there's just some context there for some of the data. But Han, I'll finish there and I'll pass back to you.
Thanks, Louise. Just quickly, these are our challenges going forward in terms of continue engaging with young people, continue our engaging with businesses, our sustainability of funding. As you're aware, our ESF programmes are coming to an end in December 2022. So that knock-on effect, I suppose, the concern around loss of expertise and specialist knowledge, opportunities for young people. We're continuously striving towards young people live, work in Monmouthshire is really important. And then the future economy, looking at the future skill set and those challenges with transport links. Over to the next slide. And we've talked about this all the way through in terms of our early intervention, flexibility, upskilling, reskilling, looking at the local economy, future training needs, our digital agenda, and how it's really important we work with our neighbouring authorities going forward in looking at employment and skills and education. Thank you, Louise. Our plan on the page is the next slide, I think. Any questions? I apologise if we went over, Chair.
No, that was very succinct, and I didn't want to pressurise you, but thank you all very much, the four of you, for such a good, sharp, clear presentation. I go now to members' questions or comments, and the first councillor is Councillor Maureen Powell.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. It's such an interesting subject, and it's a very important subject as we all want our youngsters to be working. Now, I just want to pick up on one thing. Did I hear right that the youngsters that have a year out before they go to university get counted on the NEET ones? Because
I'll take that question if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, yeah. Come in, please, Louise.
Yes, they would. Yes, they would, Councillor Powell, so thank you for your question. Essentially on the NEET list, so those young people that are in Tier 1 or 2, Tier 1 would be any young people that are not engaged in any educational training for whatever reason. So there could be young people that are, we've had Olympians before, so people who were training to be in the Olympics, but they would be considered a NEET.
yes.
So what's really an important part of our work, and something that we're looking at in our NEET reduction strategy refresh, is drilling down into the young people that, and something that we've seen this year specifically is young people that are perhaps NEETs that haven't accessed any support services through school. So this year, for example, there were 3 young people, and I should say the figures for 2021 won't be published until 2022. But in terms of our destination work, we know roughly how many young people there are, because obviously we've done the legwork. There were 3 young people that have never been supported by any of our Inspire programmes, for example, but that don't leave the house through anxiety. So something that we're really trying to consider in our the refresh NEET reduction strategy is how do we track and monitor and support those young people that are kind of in that category, if you like.
Has this got worse since with the lockdown? Have you found that there are more youngsters in that particular instance that are sort of stuck in the house and can't make that effort to go out? And
yes, I think We very much see across the programmes, if we looked at I2W across there, we almost work in sort of the peaks and troughs of COVID, if you like. So we've had a very busy summer on that programme, whereas this dip now as obviously the COVID numbers have increased. But in terms of the presenting barriers, if you like, for our young people, very much you know, significant numbers in terms of mental health, well-being, anxiety, and actually the pressure then on the specialist mental health services is really showing. We've got an example of a young person that was referred, if you like, for anxiety, but also some eating disorders in March, who has only had 4 appointments with CAMHS to date, and that is their pressure on services as well. So it's about kind of trying to bring everybody together and make sure that we can almost tier that response for young people.
Okay,
thank you very much for that. I mean, it's covering such a wide area, isn't it? Really, it's a shame that they all have to be called NEETs when you know, in that case. But I hope that, you know, more help can be given to them, because it's not something that you know, once they get into that stage of not wanting to go out of the house, it's difficult. Whatever age you are, whether you're older people as well, getting you know, anybody who gets to that stage, to encourage them to even just to go and do an odd hour part-time somewhere to get them started, it must be very difficult. And thank you so much for all the work you do in that case, because we're very thankful for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Powell. I think Melissa wanted to come in as well.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a very interesting question. I sit on the early help panel, and I think what our service provides that other service don't provide is that continued support for an extended amount of time. So sometimes I might slip in with a child who's got anxiety as there's a first point of contact, and then when other services become involved, I can step back for a short amount of time. When they finish their work, I can come back in. So they've always got that constant anchor and support, and they always feel that they've got someone with them. I think that's really important, because it all wraps around well-being. I can harp on that for ages, but I won't.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to hear that. It's you know, gratifying to think that is being covered. Thank you very much.
Right, thanks both. We go now then to Councillor Joanne Watkins, please.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. First of all, just a quick comment. I'm delighted to hear that Inspire to Achieve is starting off in Year 6. It's so important to get those children identified as quickly as possible. So that's really wonderful to hear that. So my questions. The first one is around funding, because it seemed quite worrying that your funding was going to end at the end of 2022. But really great to read that you were engaging with other local authorities in the area and trying to do that. Can you elaborate a little bit on what's happening with regard to your funding? And then also on behalf of Councillor Martin Grocott, who's had to pop off to the dentist, he wanted to check that you are fully engaged with all of the 4 comprehensive schools as well. So I think in the presentation you mentioned various FE colleges, but what's your level of engagement with the comprehensives as well, please?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Watkins. If I take the first part of your question in regards to funding, as you'll see in the paper, we're working closely with the 10 local authorities. So we've been recently successful in the Community Renewal Fund for some funding for CELT. So this is in preparation for us going into the UK Prosperity Fund. So what we've looked at across our programmes is where those gaps are currently. So we're looking at a wellbeing worker coming in. We're looking at some triage around when referrals come in, they go to the right project. So it's done at a faster pace, and we're making sure that support is in place. We're looking at more digital engagement. We're looking at some more job outcomes. But what we've been doing for the last 12 months is we've been meeting regularly. The paper went to Cabinet yesterday, and Cabinet have approved us as in principle and endorsed that we can continue to work as 10 local authorities. There's a lot of expertise and knowledge across the authorities. It's quite an exciting time, although it is the sense that the money is coming to an end, but what will come next will be a more detailed delivery plan. So we're looking at a regional approach, but localized needs and circumstances where there is that flexibility. So we don't want to lose what we've got. We're going to go through a local evaluation now over the next 12 months. So we've spoken to our assistant heads in our schools, and we've had conversations around when it's coming to an end. The value of it is clearly valued in school, Inspired to Achieve, particularly us looking at that transition point you alluded to at Key Stage 2. You'll see from the work that Melissa does, the data need, and that has ramped up during COVID as well, you know, in terms of the work the team do. So we're going to, although there's been a lot of regional evaluation of the Inspire programs, we need to delve deeper now to look at what is the best for our young people, children and young people going forward. We want to continue to do that transition at Key Stage 2. We want to continue to provide more support at Key Stage 3. We want to continue to support them in their pathways into education, training, employment. So we would like to come back if we can, possibly in the summer, and present the findings from that evaluation and give you an update on what the delivery plan is looking going forward. I'll hand you to Louise now.
Thank you, Han. Yeah, so just to come in, and thank you, Councillor Watkins, for asking the question on Councillor Grocut's behalf. So, and I would have skipped over the Inspire slides just because I was conscious of time. So for Inspire to Achieve, we've got an established worker in each of the secondary schools. So they're based within the school and are very much part of we employ them and we've got a team and we support the team, but actually they're part of the school staffing, if you like, as well. And that really allows them to sort of have the projects both embedded, but allows really quick support to be put in place for those young people. And that's something that doesn't necessarily happen in counterpart I2A projects in other local authorities. They often will drop in, so actually it's seen as a sort of a good practice element of our work, if you like, that worker is based there. And then the I2W team, there's 2 currently in place, and they work on a north-south divide for Monmouthshire, but we again work as an Inspire team, if you like, so that we can respond to need across the 2 projects with the groups, and also hand over. So essentially, if we've got young people that are coming to the end of I2A that perhaps are struggling and aren't ready to make those next steps into an established destination, that our I2W is in an early sort of early intervention, if you like, as early as we can all of the time. Does that answer your question? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, on a personal basis, yes, I'd love you to come back in the summer and explain more after the evaluation. So that sounded great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I certainly ask the scrutiny officer, Hazel Isla, to sort of make a note of that so that we do ask you back, because obviously this is such important work. I'm going to go to Councillor Louise Brown, and then I'll come to Maggie Harris, who's for MASC. Councillor Louise Brown.
Yes, thank you very much for the report, and you know, obviously the work that you do is very, very valuable for young people. I just wondered, looking at sort of Appendix 3, which detail quite a lot of the projects and schemes, such as Kids Start, Inspire to Work, etc. I just wondered, it gives a table of the number of participants, but it's not quite clear how many of those participants actually come from Monmouthshire, you know, so it would be helpful if there is a further report, sort of if we could have a breakdown of the different schemes and the young people who are part of that scheme, you know, sort of comparing from one year to another. And I appreciate that the schemes have got some, you know, different fundings, but if one funding disappears, then we might have a better notion of the impact of what it's having in terms of the number of people from Monmouthshire who are dealing with it. And you know, so I wasn't really quite clear how many people in Monmouthshire were actually involved, because presumably some of the schemes perhaps are Gwent-wide or whatever, but they're not Gwent-wide. But okay, I think there was quite a high number in the table in Appendix 3. So it'd be useful if there could be a breakdown of those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to take that?
Louise is volunteered to take the question.
Right, Louise. Thank you.
I'll come in on that. So the numbers that are provided in terms of the Inspire projects are just the numbers that we have achieved in Monmouthshire. So, but that'll be since the start of the programmes. We are a regional operation, and so I'm also happy to share with anybody that is interested the wider numbers for the regional operations, because you can also compare us to our partners then, if you like, and see the types of numbers that are going through. In terms of all of our projects, Han, you might want to come in here, but we'll monitor and record numbers across all of our projects, so that is available for anybody that wishes to see it.
Okay.
Thank you, Louise. If there is any further information, Chair, you would like after the meeting, then just let us know, as Louise said, because we are compared with other authorities regularly, so you can see some more in-depth performance, how we are performing compared to neighbouring authorities. So please let us know, Councillor Brown, as well.
Yeah, I think really, I suppose in relation, if it's since the start of the different schemes, then I presume the different schemes have started not necessarily at the same time. So unless you sort of have a breakdown saying 2017 to 2021, 22, you can't actually see in relation to the different schemes how the numbers have fluctuated. If you for example, I think there was a figure somewhere of 180. Well, if that's since the start of the scheme, has the scheme been going on 10 years, so it will be 18 per year or something like that. I think it's useful to know that, because then you'd actually know the impact with regard to the funding streams as well, of possibly the numbers that you would no longer be able to assist if any of those funding schemes went down. But then if you also have a comparison with the Gwent area, then you can also see whether or not they're still getting funding on it, as an argument to say, well, why aren't we, so I think that will be useful.
Okay.
But it's just really to have figures on comparisons, so we know what's happening over time, really.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Brownlee.
Not necessarily for now, but for perhaps a further report.
We'll follow that up. Okay. Thanks. I will now go to Maggie Harris, who's for MASC, the Monmouthshire Governors. Maggie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation, which was enlightening, to say the very least, because these kind of support systems can float under the radar so easily unless you're very much involved. And I have to declare an interest here, because I'm also a governor at Derry View School, which does interact with you and so many other educational support services. Frankly, the interaction at year 6 and year 7, this transition, if you catch the children then or even earlier, and I rather like the idea that Melissa was explaining, that you can sort of dip in and dip out and catch them once emergency systems have ended, that you're there then to pick it all up again. And that is absolutely crucial. And I know it is for so many of our young children, particularly during this COVID time, when poverty and deprivation are playing such a major role. So I suspect that your workload in the next few years will actually pick up quite dramatically. And one of the reasons it will pick up is because you're doing this year 6 and year 7 transition work. And I'm sure Melissa, knows of earlier years rather than just year 6 and 7. So I would be very, very interested to have feedback later, just to know how your funding is actually going and what can be done to support the system that you're running, which is absolutely invaluable. The numbers may not sound very high as the numbers of pupils, but it is crucial, because if you lose these young people young, you'll never achieve success when they're 16 or 17, because you've almost missed the boat. But so I just want to say thank you, and the explanation was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks. Okay, thank you, Maggie Harris, for that. That was very useful. I don't know if you want to come back on that, anybody, or not, or just accept that as a comment. Okay. Any other comments or questions from members of the committee? Well, obviously, I'd first and foremost like to thank the four of you for such a good, clear, concise presentation on what's going on in your area, and it's heartening, you know, as a committee, and I must say as an individual, to see the good work that you're doing in this area. I know it's been mentioned, but I will very briefly mention again, but the fact this transition stage, key stage 2 to 3, so many children do, as it were, drop off the edge there, and children perhaps who are not in difficult circumstances, but it is a huge transition, and I think perhaps, you know, we tend, people perhaps tend to forget that, how big a change it is in terms of moving from key stage 2 with one class teacher generally, etc., in probably a relatively small school, to go into a huge comp and then have 10 or 11 teachers with different styles, different expectations, different experiences. So, you know, I think that, you know, that is particularly good. I think this intervention in terms of things like anger management and self-esteem and advocacy is so important. For many children, they don't have parents who are able perhaps to advocate on their behalf. And I think that is very important, and particularly in terms of children with ALN issues. I'm heartened by what I hear in terms of funding, and I'm sure the committee is, and that it's crucially important that, and I know Councillor Groker's had to step out because of a dental appointment, but he emphasised the importance, the ongoing importance of funding to ensure that these youngsters do not move out of education. They're not in education or any form of training, and really hearing about the issue of homelessness, and I'm Vice Chair of Corporate Parenting, and care leavers have a very difficult time in terms of accommodation when they move out from foster care at 18, and yes, with support of a case worker, but not with the support of parents, as many children have, to see them into work or see them into university. So I'm really heartened today by what you said. We might come back to you on Councillor Louise Brown's issue about the different sort of breakdown of stats, but once again, diolch yn fawr, thank you very much for your input today, and you know, this committee will invite you back in the summer for a further update. So thank you all for your efforts, and thank you for coming along. Thank you. Thanks. Right, we now move on, and we go now then to the select, the children CYP forward select planner. The next meeting in January we will have the youth offending service, and we will have budget monitoring for month 7. We discussed at the pre-meeting, and the committee agreed that we should have a further meeting at 2 p.m. on the 31st of January to discuss the overall budget, and we will be inviting the Cabinet Member for Resources, Councillor Phil Murphy, and the Chief Officer for Finance, Mr. Peter Davis, to come to that meeting. It'll be a 2-hour meeting from 2 until 4 o'clock on the 31st of January. So I hope everybody's happy with that. In terms of agenda item 8, Cabinet and Council Work Plan, that is purely for information. Item 9, to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Is somebody happy to propose that is an accurate record of our last meeting?
I'll propose that, Tudor.
Thank you, Councillor Maureen Powell. Anybody going to second that?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Happy to second.
Okay, we take Louise Brown as a seconder. Thank you very much. And unless there is any dissension, I assume that everybody's happy that that is an accurate record. Agenda item 10, date and time of the next meeting. It is the 20th of January 2022 at 10 o'clock. Thank you all for attending this morning. Thank you all to the presenters today in terms of their presentations on all the different cabinets in terms of all the agenda items. And as this is the last meeting before Christmas, it seems a bit early, but I wish you a Merry Christmas, Nadolig Llawen, a blwyddyn newydd dda, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I look forward now to seeing you on the 20th of January. Thank you all for your time. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Nadolig Llawen.
Thank you.
Nadolig Llawen, diolch.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Bye-bye. Bye all.
Bye.
Hwyl.
Thanks.
Diolch.
Bye.